Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first official video minus the intro. We're looping these in a series just so we can help get the channel up and thriving. But if no one's been following our LinkedIn, our publications, or Intersect dev reports, this is kind of to open up why Intersect is focusing so heavy on open source for Cardano. And we'll share the link to this deck in the bio. But essentially, we wanted to give an update because if you have been keeping up with the Cardano 360 videos on what is open source or how the open source committee has been up and running and helping with all that, we have compiled this State of the Union to summarize all those if you missed that, or also support what we as the open source office and the committee have been doing to address the community concerns related to open source and Cardano, community inclusion, all kinds of things. So this will kind of go over where we are at this point in time. I'll hand it over to Tex.
Hey everyone, it's Tex. So of course we are back here. We're going to take a look at a few things again as far as State of the Union. Where are we at? Why are we focusing on open source? What is the big picture here? So what we were able to find or determine with the help of our open source committee here is that core Cardano has room for improvement when it comes to effectively being open source. Between collaboration of the open source office and the open source committee, we've been tasked with creating a strategy to curtail the situation and bring it into focus. Since January, we took ownership of 27 core Cardano repositories. These were very centralized in nature as they come from the previous IOG management, right? It's a lot of IOG devs on those. And so what we're really looking to do is open this up to community contributors for them to be able to get their code onto the mainnet and improve Cardano overall. Now, what we found as far as the collaboration with open source office and open source committee, we conducted a few surveys out there, and we found that the community actually wants to become very involved in the process, and they expressed their concerns back to the open source committee on what their wants and desires are, or where they see that Cardano is lacking in terms of being open source. So we've now implemented a number of different strategies and policies, and we'll make sure that we have our Git book linked as well so that you can see all of those. We're in the process of undergoing testing and evaluation with goals to have all of this completed at least in the first instance, or the first stage, if you will, by the time we get to our annual members meeting in October. That is the Intersect annual members meeting. Go ahead. I'll give it over to Christian there.
Yeah, sorry, cut you off early. But just to build off what Tex was saying, so the open source committee is actually, I guess at this point in time, almost a year in the making. We started it August last year, right after Intersect was incorporated. But it was mostly for people who had been founding members. We just put a survey out there for anyone who had their hands up to get interested in open source. And so that's how our original committee was formed. We've had some people drop in and out since then, but they were really focused behind this mission and how to transform Cardano into an open source model. And one of the things to start with was actually finding out where our basically where our sore points, pain points within the development and all these things. So we actually did a survey from October to the beginning of January, almost 90 to 120 days, somewhere in between there, just to compile community feedback. And the link will be down there where the source doc is. But essentially, it highlighted multiple areas that Cardano in open source ethos in general could improve. And number one was the lack of community engagement. As Tex elaborated in the framing slide, because it was all under IOG's banner, there was a lot of centralized development there, not intentional. Open source was still a theme. It just wasn't efficiently in open source. And so that's where Intersect comes over, taking over that code base and actually making it community driven and owned now. And so one of our big pillars to attack is that lack of community engagement. There's also the complexity of the code base, because a lot of it's written in the Haskell language, and usually that's a niche language, even though we do have a big community built around it. If we can also attack the barrier of entry to learning Haskell or supporting other node languages, we can definitely help attack that pace. The other thing is slow development in general, just because we are very academic rigor that has led to slow development, but when things get produced, they're of high quality, and I think that's where Cardano stands out amongst other blockchains, at least from what I learned at Consensus this year. The other thing that we are improving on, and this is something I was addressing when I was at IOG, was the limited documentation, just getting basic files added to our repositories to be more onboarding friendly to contributors. The other thing was the centralization concerns. Obviously, Intersect exists now, so we're addressing those issues. Accessibility and lack of transparency goes hand in hand with that altogether. So this is what the community via our survey process put together. And so I'll let Tex cover how the committee actually attacked that problem.
All right. So the open source committee, we went ahead and compiled and deliberated the content from the research that took place over a 3-month period there, right? That's where we collected all of that feedback from the community and, of course, better learned about how much they wanted to be involved. So there were too many things for us to start working on completing work like right away. So we had to pick 3 key targets that would be part of the formation of the strategy, 3 pillars, if you will, for us to move this forward. The 3 pillars selected here is going to be technical sustainability, governance and decision-making, and community engagement and collaboration. So I'll mention right now, as far as technical sustainability, the open source committee has actually taken on the responsibility of managing, or rather overseeing, the technical working groups that have come from IOG, specifically to the core Cardano projects, right? So we provide not only a sounding board for them, but we ensure that any technical needs or just their conversation channels are open and available to them so that we can continue to move progress forward. When it comes to governance and decision-making, we're also currently supporting the GovTool working group here. And that, of course, is focused on not only the Chang hard fork, but other governance decisions and how that's going to evolve as we move forward here with the development of Cardano. When it comes to community engagement and collaboration, I'll tell you, I've taken this on firsthand. We're completely redesigning the group structure here at Intersect. So working groups are going to be specifically aligned with a committee. So there's not a working group unless you've been tasked by a committee. Anybody can form a special interest group, which is going to be that bottom or first tier, right? So anything that you're interested about, absolutely. Come be a member of Intersect, right? Come jump on the Discord channel and come have those conversations, learn and grow with the rest of the community. And then as, again, that aligns with the community, with the committee's strategy, right? Or with the technical objective that we're working towards, we'll get you transitioned into a working group. I do want to make sure that working groups are noted as that they are short term, right? So they are designed to get out a certain body of work, and then those, of course, would be spun down again, but they don't necessarily go away. They're just back to an interest group until that group may be necessary again to either revise what was provided before or adapt and move, adapt and continue building for the future from that perspective. Everything that we do here, as far as the 3 pillars that were selected, and I mean, the overall here, it is designed to be strategic alignment with our goals, right? So again, I'll refer back to the open source committee, open source office Gitbook page. Have a look at that strategy, see what we're aligned with and those goals, although some of them may be listed for Q4. Again, we are still targeting completion by the annual members meeting in October. I'll pass it back over to Christian here now.
And just to help elaborate that too, so with those goals, they actually build off of these pillars as well. So this technical sustainability, as Tex was already elaborating to, one other connecting point to that is we are focusing on making sure that those structures are in place. So it connects with the governance and decision making. We have these working groups to make sure that they're sustainable. We're building ecosystems around them, getting community plug-in, but there's also now a governance structure that ties back to support from the TSC. And that works by each of these projects having a project management committee tied to these working groups, wherein you talk about the day-to-day, it's a meet the maintainers kind of forum. So if you have an issue, you can get an answer resolved during that cadence. If that needs to escalate, it can go to the meta project level. And the best way to examine that would be you have the Plutus working group that are meeting regularly every 2 weeks. You could join that, discuss an issue. If it can't be resolved there, you could go to the core Cardano meeting, which will be up and coming here very shortly. for the meta project level, and that's where they can discuss between all the projects under the core Cardano meta project to try and resolve that issue. If it needs to go further, it can go to our technical steering committee and get an expert opinion from that architecture level, how to address the issue. So we do have that feedback loop there. And that ties in the governance and decision making and our community engagement and collaboration. We're also attacking which I'll talk about more towards the end of this presentation, about community plugins for maintainers to diversify the projects, attacking that centralization piece where we can actually start bringing in a contribution ladder where contributors can actually look to a roadmap of how they can engage to eventually get to being a trusted committer and even a maintainer by interacting with the certain projects related to their skill sets. And that way we're starting to build that bridge of being community driven. And we do have a pilot program to test that process, which we will getting into. But that whole slide was focusing on what the open source committee is doing, and they're very much our clientele and the representation of the membership base of who we answer to. But the open source office is also an Intersect department, so we do have some autonomy, even though everything we do is bought off by the open source committee. So all our initiatives will be with their ratification and approval for us to proceed forward with. But we are able to complement what they do by having more availability, since we're a direct office within Intersect. And with that, we are building upon their strategy by these various programs listed here. The first one being the Bitergia reporting mechanisms. Tex has been the champion behind this. Bitergia comes from the chaos community about how you define open source metrics. And we just recently released our first report publicly about the development of everything happening under the Intersect GitHub with some insights and key project details. We'll be expanding those report types to include community reports about attention, retention of main core developers and things associated with that, more community tie-in plugins. The other thing that I'm happy to announce towards the end of Q2 is we're going to have a project support service catalog, which we will be testing with some of our infrastructure partners over at the CBIA, Anastasia Labs, and AWIN, about how we can give back to the community, not just our direct membership, but also the external Cardano community, by having the open source office provide support, whether it be PR related to this YouTube channel, LinkedIn posts, how to help projects get more awareness, to in the future legal services about what licensing is appropriate, issues related to that, technical documentation, how you can write a contributing MD, your change log, things like that. Product management if we need to, and building your community base, how you can actually handle open source contribution, what are the best open source practices related to that, and kind of be a bridge for projects in Cardano who achieve their MVP but don't know what the next step is. And so that support service catalog is the base layer, but we want to build it into our incubation process, which the committee is about to have out by the end of Q2, where you can apply to actually incubate under Intersect, similar to like how Linux, CNCF, the Apache Foundation do with projects, where you go through several tiers, and we'll have a whole video breaking that down, but it allows projects to come in and grow to become mature things, and give them business models and things and how to build adoption and commercial value potentially. The other thing with this connects to the contribution ladder, which I talked about earlier, which is our community maintainer process, what a maintainer means on the documentation level, how you can potentially come there. Obviously, it's up to the projects themselves to adopt these maintainers, and you have to interact with them. But we're just building a common ladder that you can expect that by doing these things, you potentially can become a maintainer. Obviously, it's our mission at the open source office and the committee to drive that diversification. And then we also are doing our pilot, which I'll cover again at the end of this deck, talking about what testing the community maintainer process. We currently have something going on with Cardano addresses in partnership with IOI, the CF, and Drip Drops. And we are evaluating how that policy, as well as the strategy and everything associated, is working in that. And it's just a base evaluation so we can make some modifications if needed to those policies and strategies and adoption. And then the thing that I'm really looking forward to is we developed a 14-point use case for open source maturity. And this was done in partnership with Hyperledger, Linux folks, Red Hat, Bitergia, and there's another open source foundation I'm forgetting, but my expert council, for lack of a better word, on how do you best measure and test an open source environment. So these 14 points are things that contributors or anyone coming from the community should be looking for in a basic engagement level. So we're testing that right now in parallel with the community process, and I'll cover that at the end, and should have results come out. But that's how the open source office is complementing in the open source committee.
All right. Well, I'll take over here once again. What we want to show next here, or rather what is next in our delivery, is rather just to show how all of this works together towards creating open source in core Cardano, or rather making core Cardano to be open source. So this is showing not the inputs from the open source committee as well as the inputs from the open source office, and where these come together to address the issues that were presented by the community in that 3-month research period that was conducted. Everything really links together, but we're able to determine more clearly the lack of community engagement based on the data that we're able to get out of our Bitergia reports. When it comes to complexity of the code base, having our project support service catalog there is going to be able to help make sure that there's no legal concerns, that everyone knows where they can come to for that additional support. That'll direct and kind of highlight those technical working groups a little bit more, and potentially even make those into a more, let's say, easily understood format. As far as the transparency, we are constantly working on documentation to make sure that we have that backed up from any side, whether that's just our policy, it's our frameworks, the strategy itself, or even how to become a maintainer, and some details on how these pilots and policies actually get adopted, right? The limited documentation is something that, of course, tying into that completely goes away in this instance, because with the assistance of working groups, if there's a document that's necessary and the open source office isn't able to put that together and get that ratified or approved by the committee, then we have a working group that we can assign to do that. And again, all of that work comes back and again gets ratified and approved. The centralization concerns here really begin to dissipate, or that's at least the hope as you see here. The open source committee being full of members of the community. So although you may see some of the same people in there, primarily those are the ones that have seats on the open source committee. They have the voting power, or rather the power to approve or ratify these documents that we bring back to them. But the meeting is open to everyone. As far as the open source office, we are consistently putting out the open source committee and everything that we're doing, such as this slide deck, right? So that everyone's able to see, everyone's able to understand, and where additional input is necessary or desired to be provided, we do have many different channels to collect that. So hopefully this makes sense. If there's a different format that we can provide that in, we'd be more than happy to kind of reorchestrate it here. But this is where we're at, and this is how we're doing. Christian?
Completely. And I just noticed one thing I forgot to mention too was when we're talking about building community collaboration, we're actually about to have a developer advocate program go online by the end of Q2, if not earlier. Trying to find at this point in time 3 developer advocates to go out and plug into the developer community, make their pain points known to us, also to help build what the onboarding is supposed to look like for merit-based contributors, what training you should have if you're new to the environment, what do you need to know to actually make meaningful contributions to the code base and actually become kind of a subject matter expert, for lack of a better word. And these developer advocates, there's an application process that's going online. There's some base compensation for their time, but mainly they're just there to help promote the mission of open source, try to push in developer experiences to the open source committee so we can tailor policies to address these pain points and try to make how we develop core Cardano or the other projects under Intersect, or even try to influence the wider Cardano base to better development practices altogether. So that will be coming online here shortly. So please look forward to that. And we're looking forward to having the community come in and help us and make sure that our number one constituent, which is the developers, are heard. And so as I was alluding to earlier, the open source pilot, it's a two-prong approach. The first one is the maintainer pilot, i.e. if we want to improve Cardano to be truly open source, we need to test whether a community member can get a change in the core Cardano code. So we are actually doing this with Cardano addresses. And we're also doing that by diversifying our current maintainers lists on core Cardano repos, i.e. instead of it just being IOG, we're bringing in our other core suppliers to be put on those code owner files and actually be ones merging and reviewing PRs and things. And that list will continue to expand as we go throughout the year. The second piece to this is that 14-point contributor use case that I was talking to. We'll have links to both of these in this deck here shortly. But essentially it covers big things like unclear governance decision making. This directly ties in with our governance policy and tests that concept altogether. When you come in, do you know who is governing the project you are trying to contribute to? How can you get escalations dealt with? And is the onboarding clear enough? There's also the limited contributor engagement. If I'm opening an issue, how long is it sitting there? If I try to do a merge PR, what's the review time? Am I even getting any interactions on comments? Or how am I interacting with maintainers to ensure that this work gets done? And if it's not merged, what are the reasons as to why? Just making sure these things are known. Documentation fragmentation. You can't tell you how many times I've seen an about but not a README inside a repo. So this addresses that, making sure that contributing MDs are there and onboarding is clear cut. And then quality assurance, unclear collaborative roadmaps, making sure GitHub projects is there if the projects want to do that. And then inadequate education and training. There's a lot of things here. And I think if we can eventually get to a letter grade of an A with all of these combined, we can confidently say we're open source in practice. And then we can build upon that based on what other foundations do as well. But this is just to evaluate how we are to truly say Cardano is open source. And these results, we're in the evaluation period right now. We conclude next Friday. And then we're going to start putting in the conclusion, and we should have those publications out before the 28th. But just to make sure that we have the OSC and they're happy with what we have, we'll get those approved and published for everyone. And that's kind of the mission in and of itself of what we are doing currently for open source in Cardano. From the open source office and the open source committee, with Tex also being the secretary for the committee, he makes sure that all our meeting minutes are published. We will be meeting this next Friday on the 21st. It's every 2 weeks from there, pending holidays that might miss things. And if you're also looking to get involved with us, there's the Discord server. We have every other week, we will be meeting. So 1 week will be the committee. Then you can meet with us in our open source office hours. If you have any initiatives or concerns like that, feel free to reach out to us. But in essence, that's the open source office, our open source mission, the open source committee. If I'm not available, feel free to ping Tex. He is very active on our Discord and everything. So thank y'all.